Because ahead of releasing his new memoir, the former Prime Minister has spoken to Camilla Tominey to talk about his time in office and his views on politics.
Well, in the interview, he's also asked about his meetings with the late Queen and whether she thought he was a difficult Prime Minister to work with. Let's take a listen.
Did you have a bit of a testy relationship with King Charles? Did you get on with the Queen and Prince Philip a bit better than...
No, I think... Look, I mean, what's certainly fair to say is that I used to see the Queen every week.
Yes.
And that was one of the great, great joys of the job, because it was kind of free psychotherapy.
Yeah.
And there was no confession so appalling that, you know, she'd heard it all before, right?
Would you say she had her work cut out with you compared to other Prime Ministers?
I don't know. You'd have to... Well, I don't know. But she was always... Look, she was... What I can say is she was always very supportive and kindly and full of really good advice. And so she wouldn't, you know, I sort of have a fair idea of what she thought about lots of things, but she wouldn't really reveal her hand much, but she would
You
nudge you.
indicate that she's a bit Brexity.
No, I wouldn't go into her political views, and that wouldn't be right.
Well, Boris Johnson also gave his view on the recent revelation that he attempted to stop Meghan Markle and Prince Harry from fleeing the UK. Here's what he had to say about that.
Prince Harry and Meghan, in my view, they came to an event we did for female education. They were brilliant. And she was particularly good and articulate and on it and on the detail.
So you got on quite well with Meghan?
Yeah. I got on well with both of them. And I also worked with Harry when he did his Invictus Games for disabled veterans in the Olympic Park. And so in a sort of, you know, fit of pomposity, I thought, you know, this national asset is leaving our country. I think he's a force on the whole, could be on the whole a force for good. I'm going to try and discourage him. And so I had a pathetic attempt at that. It didn't work.
No.
And there you go. I failed to avert Megxit, but I did deliver Brexit.
Well, let's talk to former Special Advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley. Morning to you. Do you know what? It's very entertaining. It's very entertaining. He is an entertainer. I just don't know how seriously I take any of it. I've got to be honest.
It was the moment that shocked Britain, the royal exit no one saw coming. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, walking away from the palace, from protocol, and from the country itself. But behind the scenes, one powerful figure tried to stop them and failed. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson now admits his efforts were pathetic. According to insiders, Boris Johnson made a desperate, last-minute attempt to keep Harry and Meghan in the UK. His reasoning was simple. The monarchy was already fragile. Losing the Sussexes could ignite a crisis of confidence. Johnson's outreach came quietly, away from the cameras, but it was too late. The couple's bags were already packed, both literally and emotionally. By the time Boris reached out, the damage was done. Harry and Meghan had grown distrustful not just of the palace, but of the entire British establishment. To them, the Prime Minister was just another politician trying to protect an image, not a couple in crisis. Boris would later call his attempt pathetic, not because he didn't care, but because he knew it was doomed from the start. When the Sussexes left, the British government faced a public relations nightmare. The monarchy's image suffered, and Boris Johnson's own leadership came under fire, accused of letting a royal scandal turn into a national embarrassment. The press called it Megxit. The palace called it regret. And Boris called it his biggest failure of diplomacy. Public reaction was divided. Some praised Harry and Meghan for breaking free, others saw it as betrayal. But few knew that behind closed doors, Boris Johnson had tried unsuccessfully to keep the House of Windsor intact. It wasn't about politics, he'd later claim. It was about preserving an institution, already cracking under pressure. For Harry and Meghan, freedom came with a price: reputation, respect, and family ties. For Boris Johnson, it came with humiliation, the realization that even the power of Downing Street couldn't compete with a royal heart determined to leave. He failed to stop them. But perhaps, they were never his to stop. Years later, as Boris Johnson looks back on his time as Prime Minister, one admission stands out. "I failed," he said. "And it was pathetic. But maybe, what he failed to grasp wasn't Meghan and Harry's decision, it was their determination to write their own story, no matter the cost.
Well, I think he's, look, he'll go down as a Prime Minister that obviously had to deal with a very, very difficult time, COVID. He did things that I think were sort of against his better instincts, so locking down, he's a libertarian. He had to lock down the country 2 or 3 times. He now says that was a mistake. And I think a lot of people would agree, actually. The first lockdown, absolutely fine, the right thing to do. But the subsequent ones, I think pressure from within, he's now obviously regretting that. The vaccine rollout will be his legacy. But he does have a way with words. We miss, I think, him for his optimism and for his ability to put a good spin on something to make us feel good about ourselves. But we don't necessarily miss the chaos, I think, that came with it. So it'll be an interesting read. 738 pages, I think he was.
It's a big book, yeah.
Yes. Last night. So how much of that is sort of reflective of him and his own sort of self-analysis of what went wrong? How much of the blame for the chaos that ensued within his government and the Conservative Party that lies at his door? We'll have to wait and see just how reflective he is on that. But it was a very, very difficult time, and whether he was equipped to be Prime Minister for that particular moment in time, having won that huge majority on the back of tapping into what the country was feeling, which was getting Brexit done, we'll just have to wait and see.
Sorry, just on that, and I'm quite intrigued because he's busy saying we're all being dragged back into the EU. If he was saying these things, whether you believe him or not, if he was saying these things before the election, that might have had an impact, but he kept stum.
Well, he was able in 2019, I'm just getting my dates in a row, to say to the country, look, we haven't dealt with Brexit. And there was 2 years of a parliament under Theresa May that just couldn't decide what kind of Brexit.
Why didn't they do it in the last election? He could have helped Rishi Sunak out, couldn't he?
Well, I think you'd have to ask Rishi and whether he thought that Boris might be a help or hindrance and how much he wanted him on the campaign. And to be fair, Boris did come out at the end of the campaign, as he did for Theresa back in the day, to try and gee up the troops. But I think it's very difficult once you've been a former Prime Minister to then try and help your predecessor, when perhaps one of the big things that Boris was keen about, which was levelling up, and he created a whole new department about levelling up, and Rishi, I think, didn't take that agenda as seriously as Boris did. It could be quite difficult.
But lots of people would say, especially in the Red Wall, that Boris failed. There was no levelling up.
Well, I think COVID, which is what Boris continues to sort of, fall back on, which is one of the things that sort of shut down the economy. That's one of the things that I think he will always say, sort of cut off that sort of growth, cut off that sort of, idea and ambition to really sort of level up the country. I mean, Boris is never short of ideas and infrastructure projects that he wanted, whether it was Boris Island or whether it was, obviously, we had the brilliant Boris Bikes in London. But I think he had lots of ideas right across the country, even a bridge linking, I think, Scotland and Northern Ireland at one point.
How much of it ever came off? I mean, that's part of the thing. He comes up with some sort of weird and wonderful ideas, but then it must be people turning around saying, Prime Minister, we can't implement it, it's not practical, or we can't afford it, or all three.
Well, and one of those was HS2, obviously. He was, I think, a bit of an advocate for that because he wanted to make sure that you're getting that regional inequality and that linking up between the north and the south. And it ended up, obviously, being too costly and overrun, and that's why Rishi ditched it.
Do you miss him, Charlie? Do you think we'll see him back in politics?
Well, there was a brilliant end of the interview last night, and whether Camilla asks him the same question, we'll see with bated breath tomorrow morning. I'll be tuned in. Where he was asked, is this, the last of Boris Johnson? Is this book the sort of the final chapter, as it were, in his sort of political history? And he ducked the question again by sort of saying he's always described the chances of that coming back as equal as a reincarnated olive or something like that. So you never say never with Boris. There will always be, I think, a role for Boris in politics, whether it's on the international stage, whether it's continuing to write columns, whether it's still being part of the discussion. But I do think he has probably, like most of the country, has sensed and will be wanting to seize upon the failures of this Labour government, which seems to have had a few bumps and run-ins already, just 3 months in. And I think he'll be wanting to be part of the conversation to see what happens next maybe at the next election to steer this country in a direction that he would arguably want to see it go in.
That's interesting, though, because that is that not self-serving? And it's back to my other point. If he wanted the Conservatives to be in government, he could have given them a lot more and a much better chance to still be in government. Or would he rather they were out and then he's got a chance to take back the reins?
Well, he might have.
Be honest.
Well, absolutely. There's always more you can do. I think everybody would accept that. I mean, I think during the last campaign, there's more that any Conservative could have done. But I think he might have read the writing on the wall and thought, well, because of obviously the chaotic nature in which he left and the chaos that sort of ensued, I think the Conservative Party was always going to lose the next election. He made that calculation and therefore thought it would be a waste of political capital maybe to be over-enthusiastic about it.
And to be fair to him, he probably saw Rishi Sunak as a backstabber, didn't he? He didn't particularly want to come out in support of someone that he would see threw him out.
Yeah, and they must have had, political differences. So, Boris obviously was the architect and leader of Brexit, and whatever you think about the Windsor Framework, for example, which Rishi sort of negotiated, and it could have been could have appeared like we were getting back closer to the EU, something that Boris might have opposed. Scrapping HS2, as I say, something that Boris was an advocate of, not having the same gusto for levelling up, which Boris had, which Rishi obviously didn't. I think all of those things show that they were on perhaps slightly different paths politically, and therefore Boris might not have been able to support Rishi as much as Rishi might have wanted towards the end of the election, when obviously the wheels had come off that Conservative Party campaign.
OK, Charlie, good to see you.